There is a specific kind of violation that does not announce itself with raised voices or broken dishes. It arrives quietly while you are at work, while you are trusting someone who is supposed to be safe. It rearranges your world without asking, and by the time you come home, the evidence of what was done to you is already painted over in someone else's color scheme. This story takes place in a mid-sized city in central Ohio, in a house that one woman had been quietly paying to live in. And what happened over the course of 48 hours changed not just her living situation, but her entire understanding of what she had been allowing for years. And what happened on day 2 changed everything. My name is Maya Connors. I am 29 years old. I work as a logistics coordinator for a regional medical supply distributor in Columbus, Ohio. My job is to track shipments, manage vendor timelines, and make sure that the right equipment arrives at the right hospital at the right time. I am the person who notices when something is missing before anyone else does. I cross-reference, I document, I keep receipts, literally and figuratively. I have been doing this job for 4 years, and I am good at it. What I was not good at for a very long time was applying those same skills to my own life. Specifically, to the woman I had been living with since I was 26, my mother. Her name is Diane. She is 54 years old, and she has always had a talent for making her convenience feel like your obligation. When I moved back in after a difficult breakup, she told me it was temporary. She told me the house had space. She told me family helps family. What she did not tell me was that within 6 months, she would expect $800 a month in what she called household contributions, that she would never once refer to it as rent, and that she would reserve the right to treat the space I paid for as entirely her own. I kept paying. I told myself it was easier. I told myself it was practical. I told myself a lot of things that were not true, because the truth was harder to carry. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me, what time is it for you right now and where are you watching from? I am genuinely curious how far the story is going to travel. It was a Thursday in early November. I had worked a 10-hour shift. There had been a vendor delay on a critical cardiac monitor shipment, and I had spent most of the afternoon on the phone with a freight coordinator in Memphis, trying to reroute through a different carrier. By the time I pulled into the driveway, it was almost 7 in the evening, and I had not eaten since 11. I remember the light in the front hallway looked different when I opened the door. Warmer. I noticed the smell first, something floral and synthetic, like a new candle or a plug-in air freshener. Not the scent I was used to. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was imagining things. I walked down the hall to my room. The door was open. My door was never open. I pushed it and stood in the frame and did not move for what felt like a full minute. The bed was gone. My dresser was gone. The bookshelf I had assembled myself from a flat pack box on a Sunday 2 years ago was gone. The walls, which had been a soft gray I had painted myself, were now a pale lavender. There was a white daybed in the corner with decorative pillows I had never seen. There was a small vanity table. There was a woven area rug. None of it was mine. None of it had ever been mine. The room had been entirely cleared, decorated, and staged as if I had never existed in it. My mother was in the kitchen. I could hear the television. I walked in and she was at the stove, not looking at me, stirring something in a pot. Standing next to the refrigerator, leaning against the counter with a glass of juice, was a girl I had seen once before, maybe 16. She was Terrence's daughter. Terrence was my mother's boyfriend of 14 months, a man I had met 4 times, a man who had never once looked me in the eye when he spoke to me. His daughter's name was Brianna. She was standing in my kitchen, in my house, looking at her phone like she lived there. My mother turned around and said, with a smile I can only describe as rehearsed, "Oh, you're home early." I was not home early. I was home at the exact time I am always home. She knew that. She said, "I've been meaning to talk to you. Brianna is going to be staying with us for a while. Terrence needs her closer to her school, and your room made the most sense. I put your things in the storage unit on Fremont. I kept the key here on the hook." She pointed to the row of hooks by the back door. There was a small brass key hanging there. She had put a key to a storage unit on my hook. As if that were a reasonable sentence, as if that were a thing a person could say. I asked her where I was supposed to sleep. She gestured toward the pull-out couch in the den and said, "Just for now, just until we figure something out." I asked her when she had planned to tell me. She stirred the pot. She said, "I didn't think you'd make it a whole thing." And there it was, the sentence that told me everything. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't poor planning or bad communication. This was coordinated. She had scheduled a day when I would be at work. She had arranged for help to move my things. She had already purchased the furniture. She had painted the room. She had done all of it with full awareness that I was paying $800 a month to live there. 432 days of payments, $34,560 over the course of those years combined if you counted the additional grocery and utility contributions she had asked for temporarily and never stopped asking for. She had taken all of that and given my room to a teenager she had met 14 months ago because it was convenient for a man whose last name I did not know. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I said, "Okay." And I walked to the den and I sat down on the pull-out couch that smelled like dust and I opened my laptop. And I started working. I had always paid my mother in bank transfers. This was her preference. She did not like cash, she said. She liked the transfers because they were clean, she said. What she had not considered, what she had never once thought about, was that bank transfers are also records. Every single payment I had ever made to her was logged, dated, labeled, and attached to my account with a timestamp. I had $800 a month for 36 months, plus 14 months of an additional $200 in what she called utility sharing. I pulled up the full transaction history, and I looked at the total, and I sat with it for a moment. The number was not nothing. The number was significant. The number was, in fact, significant enough to qualify me as a legal tenant under Ohio residential tenancy law. Because Ohio does not care what you call the payment. Ohio cares whether money changed hands regularly in exchange for occupancy. And it had, for 36 months, documented, time-stamped, and attached to her account. I did not know all of this yet at 11 o'clock that Thursday night, but I knew enough to open a browser and type in Ohio tenant rights. And what I read made me very, very still in the way that only clarity can make you still. I called my coworker Dana the next morning. Dana is one of those people who knows a person for every situation. I told her what happened. She did not say, "I'm so sorry," or "That's terrible." She said, "You've been paying rent. You're a tenant. Call 211 and ask for tenant legal aid." I did. I was connected to a tenants' rights paralegal named Garrett who asked me 3 questions. Did you pay money regularly? Yes. Did you have a consistent agreement about occupancy? Yes. Was the removal of your belongings done without written notice? Yes. He said, "Then what your mother did is called an illegal lockout by displacement. She was required to give you a 30-day written notice before removing your belongings or changing the function of your space." He told me what to do next. I wrote down every word. I did not call my mother. I did not send a message. I opened my banking app and I scheduled the cancellation of all future transfers to her account, effective immediately, with a record created. I went to the city housing office on my lunch break and I filed a formal tenant displacement complaint, which triggers an automatic inspection and notice process. I requested a copy of every form. I sat in the waiting room with a folder of printed bank statements. And I was so calm that the clerk asked me twice if I was all right. I was more than all right. I was precise. I was watching every piece move exactly where I needed it to go. The transfer was gone. The complaint was filed. The documentation was sealed. And then I went back to work and I tracked a shipment of surgical equipment from a warehouse in Indianapolis to a hospital in Dayton, and I did not miss a single handoff. The first call came 2 days later. Saturday morning, 6:47. I watched my mother's name appear on my screen and I let it ring. Then it rang again. Then Terrence's number appeared, which meant she had told him, which meant he was involved now too. By noon, I had 11 missed calls between the two of them. By Sunday evening, the number was 23. By Monday morning, when the housing inspector arrived at the house on Fremont with a clipboard and a city notice, the number was 31 missed calls and 44 text messages. The text started as casual, "Maya, call me when you get a chance." and moved through confused. Why did your transfer not come through? And arrived, by Sunday night, at something that read more like a document of unraveling. This is serious, Maya. Terrence is very upset. The inspector said, WHHA, what? You did not have to do this. Maya, please. 44 messages. I read all of them and I responded to none of them. The housing office notice informed my mother that she had failed to follow proper tenant displacement procedures, that she was required to restore my access to equivalent living space within the residence or negotiate a formal exit agreement, and that failure to comply within 48 hours would escalate to a formal citation with a financial penalty attached. She called me 7 more times that evening. Terrence's daughter, from what I understand, was moved back to her father's apartment by Tuesday. The pale lavender room sat empty. The white daybed with the decorative pillows sat in the middle of a room that had been rearranged for someone who was no longer there. My mother showed up at my workplace on Wednesday. I saw her in the parking lot from the second-floor window before she came in. I went downstairs and I met her outside and we stood in the cold morning air by the side entrance and she looked at me like she expected me to fill the silence. I did not fill it. She said, "You embarrassed me in front of the whole neighborhood." I said, "You donated my bookshelf." She said, "It was just furniture." I said, "You're right, and this is just paperwork." She told me I was being dramatic. I reminded her that she was the one who had shown up at my job. She told me she needed the citation resolved. She told me she needed the transfer reinstated. She told me Terrence was reconsidering the relationship because of the stress. And then she said the thing she had said to me 100 times before, in 100 different contexts. I just need you to not make everything so complicated. I looked at her for a moment, and I said, "You told me I wouldn't make it a whole thing. Turns out I will." Then I went back inside. I did not move back into that room. I found a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of Columbus with a lease in my name only, and I was out within 3 weeks. The citation was resolved when my mother paid the administrative fee and signed a formal acknowledgement of the displacement. I kept the documentation. I keep all documentation now. I moved my bookshelf, which I retrieved from the storage unit on Fremont, along with everything else she had packed into boxes, into my new living room, and I assembled nothing that night. I just sat on the floor next to it and I let the quiet happen. There is something I have been working on understanding for a long time, and it is this. I used to confuse endurance with loyalty. I thought that staying, that absorbing, that not making things complicated was the same as being a good daughter. They trained me to stay small. Every time I made myself easier to manage, every time I transferred the money without asking for acknowledgement, every time I painted a room and called it mine while knowing it wasn't really, I was not being loyal. I was practicing disappearance. Love that demands your silence is not love, it is control. And the difference between the two is not always loud. Sometimes it is as quiet as a lavender room that appeared while you were at work. So here is what I want to ask you. If you were sitting on that pull-out couch, staring at the key on the hook, would you have stayed or walked out? Comment 1 word. Leave if you would have cut contact and moved on. STA if you believe family always deserves one more chance.